In order for you to understand why route parameters are defined as observables, first we need to look at what happens to our components during navigation. So let's say the user is on a page, and on this page we have component A. Now they click on a link or a button to go to a different page where we display component B. In this case, Angular is going to destroy component A, remove it from the DOM, and then it's going to create an initialized component B and render its template in the DOM. Also, to refresh your memory, we have component lifecycle hooks. So earlier I told you about the onInit and onDestroy interfaces. So if you want to be notified when a component is initialized or destroyed, you can implement these interfaces and add the corresponding methods in your components. So this is component lifecycle during navigation. Now let's take a look at a different scenario. So imagine we have a link or a button on component A that allows the user to navigate away from this page, but also get to the same page. What is a real-world example of this? Well, imagine you're building a banking application where the user can see all their transactions and the details of each transaction. On the transaction detail page, we have two buttons, previous and next. When the user clicks on either of these buttons, they go to the previous or the next transaction, and technically they are on the same page. So in this case, it doesn't make sense for Angular to destroy this component only to recreate it straight away after. So in this particular use case, what we have is the same component instance, but with different route parameters. So Angular is not going to destroy this component and is going to keep it in the DOM. And this is exactly the reason why route parameters are defined as observables. And this brings us to a different level of understanding about observables. An observable is technically a collection of asynchronous data that arrives over time. In the section about consuming HTTP services, we simply subscribe to an observable to get the response from the server. In that particular case, we had only one item or one object in our observable. That was the response from the server. But we can use observables to model streams of asynchronous data. So data comes into this stream, and anyone who has subscribed to this observable will be notified. Now, as a real-world example, here in GitHub profile component, we are subscribing to this param map observable. So GitHub profile component is an observer of this observable. Anytime there is new data in this collection, GitHub profile component will be notified. As a metaphor, think of a mailing list. When you subscribe to a mailing list on a blog, every time there is a new post, you will be notified. We have the exact same concept here. So we are subscribing to this param map, which is a collection of route parameters that can change over time. And every time there is a new route parameter, we'll be notified. Now, to help you better understand what happens to components lifecycle during navigation, I'm going to temporarily delete this code. And here in ng-oninit, I'm going to log something in the console. GitHub profile onInit. Now back in the browser, if there is anything in the console, I want you to clear it right now. Now back here, I'm going to click on the first follower. So this takes us to the GitHub profile page. During this navigation, the old component, which was the followers component, was destroyed. And this new component, which is GitHub profile, was initialized and placed in the DOM. So now if you look at the console, we have this message, GitHub profile onInit. Okay? Now if I go back to the followers page again, that component is now destroyed and is no longer in the DOM. Instead, we have the followers component. Now let's click on the second follower. Back in the console, now we have two messages for GitHub profile onInit. So this shows that every time we navigate away from this page and go to the followers list and come back, this component is reinitialized. Okay? Now I want to show you what happens when we give the user the ability to stay on the same component and navigate back and forward. So we're not going to navigate away from this component. This component is going to stay in the DOM, but the route parameters are going to change. And this is what I want you to pay great attention to. With this new implementation, we're going to see only one onInit message in the console. because the component instance is not going to be reinitialized. It's going to stay in the DOM. So let me show you. First, let's go to GitHub profile.html. On this page, I'm going to add a button like a next or a previous button. So a button with two classes. Let's call it next. And here I'm going to bind the router link property to this array. The path is /followers. And as a route parameter or as a route argument, I'm going to supply some magic number here. It doesn't matter. When we click this button, we'll be on the same page, but the route parameter is going to change. So let's see this in action. Now back here, first I'm going to go in the console. So currently we have GitHub profile on init. And we see this message the first time we land on this page. Now, if I click the next button, we're not going to get a second on init message. Click. So you can see the route parameter changed, but in the console, we still have only one on init message. So this verifies that Angular did not destroy this component and recreate it. We have a single instance. So if you have an application with this kind of navigation built into it, because ng on init is called only once, in order to get access to the route parameters, you need to subscribe to the route map observable. So that's why we have this, the route.parammap.subscribe. So every time we have a new parameter, we can get that here. Params goes to this code block, and here we log params.getID. Let's test this back in the browser. So first, I'm going to clean up the console. I'm going to go to the followers page, click on the first follower, look in the console, we have the ID of the first follower. Now I'm going to click the next button. We're still on the same component, the route parameter changed, and in the console, we have the second ID. So this is the reason we need to subscribe to this observable. But in your applications, if you don't have this kind of scenario, if you don't allow the user to stay on the same page and navigate back and forth, there is a simpler way to get access to route parameters. So if you're 100% sure that the user has to navigate away from this page, go somewhere else and then come back, instead of subscribing to an observable, you can use a snapshot. So here we can use this .route.snapshot.param map. And this is the actual param map object and not an observable. So we can call the get method to get the ID parameter. Store it here and then log it in the console. Now we don't need this code anymore. So back in the browser, I'm on the followers page. I'm going to go to the first follower. We are on the profile for the first follower. So we should see their ID in the console, as you can see here. Now, assuming that we don't have this next button here, we always have to go back to the followers list in order to go to a second follower. And because our profile component is reinitialized, we can use the snapshot to get the ID of the second follower. So now in the console, we have two entries. So this is why route parameters are defined as observables.